Welcome to part 2 of our ArchiTech tour around MVRDV. In this part, we're going to sit down with Leo and Sanne and talk about the next team, computation, BIM, AI, and all these kind of things. If you missed part 1, you can go back and check out the tour. Otherwise, we're going to jump into it and have a chat with Leo and Sanne.
Hi, my name is Leo Stuckardt. I'm an architect and researcher at MVRDV. I'm an associate and part of the MVRDV NEXT team.
Leo, thank you so much for the tour. Really unique and incredible space. Definitely the most colourful office we've been in, and I think this is probably the coolest backdrop we've had. In interviews. I feel like this could be in a magazine. This is a good magazine shoot.
It was in the past, yeah. So it's a part of a project, this research project I mentioned earlier, Vertical Village, and I guess reducing or representing the diversity we find in housing in particular into some shapes and simple primitive geometries. And we made a furniture series out of it. You normally find them spread out all over the office, and it's very playful to stack them and reconfigure them as we did today.
It looks fun. All right, maybe start with we touched on a little bit about what is the next team, but what is the next team and kind of how do you work in the office?
Yes, so I think to begin, really, Next grew organically to some extent, or it emerged out of a need, and it was formally established in 2018, so around 6 years ago now. It grew at the time we were 2 or 3 people, and the origins are clearly in computational design, and I would say also very much in Rhino and Grasshopper and scripting. And the name of the group that we chose at the time as Next is based on the one hand, on a kind of lecture series at the time that was built here on what's next and this kind of endless drive and curiosity. But it's also an abbreviation for new experimental technologies. And I think that's still where I would see the core, in the experiment and in the failure, but also, of course, in the successful implementation. And since we started with, I think it was 2 people, 3 people, Sanne van der Burg, the current director of Next, me, and we grew into, it fluctuates, but at this point around 11 people, with a focus still on the one hand in computation and on the other hand more and more in climate-related research, so expertise in materials, in construction techniques, in environmental modeling, or demountable circular strategies and so on. So it's a diverse team. We're all trained as architects, have an architecture background, but then a kind of strong drive or fascination towards a specific topic.
Yeah. And I see, so you're kind of covering computation, you've got geometry, all that kind of stuff. You've got simulation, you've got some AI side. Then you've got a Viz team that you showed, you've got a BIM team. They're not part of Next, but I'm sure you guys kind of work together quite closely on some things.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, so we do operate as a dedicated unit at Next. So all the members of our team are full-time in applied research and development at MVRDV. But of course, there's no gatekeeping within the office towards who can explore the technologies. So there's an entire backend, I guess, of designers and architects who either in parallel or even within their ongoing work explore new technologies. And we saw this really clearly, of course, with the very sudden emergence or spread of generative AI, where everyone was somehow on their phone on mid-journey. And so that's also a role that we have as a group, to not only spearhead our own research, but to consolidate and moderate these developments that really take place across 280 practicing architects and designers.
So how do you guys work in the office, like with the design team? So, if I have a problem and I need a script, can I come and, give you a tap on the shoulder? Versus you're creating tools, office-wide. Like, how do you balance those two?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the central questions to operating such a unit within a large office. I could describe the current moment, and I could describe how it used to work in the past. I would say there's no recipe to it, so it probably will change again in the future. Our core and our primary mission is to support the life work of architecture projects and urban projects at MVRDV. So we're not an independent research unit in an academic sense. we have such projects, but the reason to exist, if you will, is to strengthen MVRDV's design method and MVRDV's design tools. So collaboration with design teams is key, not only in the Rotterdam office, but also in the satellites in Paris, in Berlin, and in Shanghai. And there are multiple ways. Of course, what you described, the kind of last minute, hey, do we have a script that can automate all these things or optimize or rationalize complex geometry very quickly? That happens. Not ideal for either of the sides. So we do actively steer towards kind of anticipating and identifying potential collaborations, internal collaborations ahead of time. There are a couple of things we do for that. On the one hand, we do actively communicate our ongoing work and the scopes that we work in. So it can be design rationalization, standardization of complex geometry, but also narrative, animation. There's an increase in interactive design or interaction design, so parametric models that in some form can be changed dynamically by designers or other stakeholders. And to communicate and share that so that just that the design teams are aware of what we can do. The other part then is, of course, identifying tasks that keep coming back. So if you encounter the same problem 10 times across 10 projects, we will build a more robust tool, write a documentation of how that tool can be used and test it. And so I would say project-specific support over time solidifies into at least an office-wide tool, and eventually at some times even into tools that we share externally.
Right. So one question we ask everyone, which is kind of deliberately a bit of a simple question, but like to illustrate to young architects out there that the tools and technologies that we use, the designers that I'm watching here, what are the tools they use? Is it Rhino, all these kind of things?
There's I would say there's a core which is Rhino and Revit, for sure in the architectural space. Adobe Suite still present and used. So these are really the kind of bare bones, and I would say probably the only hard requirements that we have. Adobe, InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, Rhino, with Grasshopper ideal, with Enscape can be useful, but the core is Rhino and Revit. Other than that, from my own experience, I have to say I think learning software is easy. Once you know one tool and you have a good use case, you will learn another one. So I would not rely on learning specific tools in order to achieve a qualification as an architect, but certainly Rhino and Revit will help or are needed to work in a firm like MVRDV. Other than that, maybe to go more specific from the general architects pool at MVRDV towards Next, still Rhino Grasshopper important. I think that's the only hard requirement we have. Other than that, we have people with expertise in game engines, so Unity and Unreal Engine. We have people with an expertise in GIS, so QGIS, but also ArcGIS, more urban planning, web development. I think anything really can be useful there if you can bring it together with these core fundamental skills. And what we realized is that the main skill, especially now that the technology landscape is changing so quickly, is I think we call it kind of like a hacker mentality. So don't learn a specific tool, but be able to scan GitHub, find a script, and implement it.
Tinker and experiment.
So whatever is out there, gear it towards a result as fast as possible. So understand Python. I think Python nowadays as a coding language is essential. We have a lot of people here who are in .NET languages, so C# and so on. And I think all of these elements can help to gain a literacy, really to work between open source hacky releases and using them in a project immediately makes it valuable to like building larger or more complex software solutions than where we would usually go into Visual Studio or into Rhino Grasshopper at least. So I think that's really the only way, or there's the way to be resilient towards the change that is happening in design technology.
Just keep experimenting and trying.
Yeah. And the only other part, don't learn software with tutorials, learn it through projects. I think that's the only way to encounter problems or really go to the depth of a tool, use it, and figure out the problems that you encounter rather than hypothetical ones.
How about, do you do like do you guys do kind of in-house training where you kind of teach people, Grasshopper, for example?
Yeah.
How do you share knowledge from your team to the designers?
Yes. Again, there are multiple ways. I think there are moments, like for instance, around 7 years, I would guess, MVRDV as a whole transitioned to BIM, made a full commitment to Revit. That was an enormous effort, both in the setting up of libraries and templates, but especially in training designers and architects. So that then there were external trainings organized, and that is still the case. So people have, to get back to your question, so we do internal training. Of course we do. So we offer workshops on Grasshopper. We did a lot of workshops on different generative AI techniques, so Comfy, UI, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and all that. We do have external training as well. And in addition to that, every employee of MVRDV has an annual self-development budget. So financial as well as time budget to choose courses that they're interested in. Quite often there's technology or software training, but it could also be public speaking or writing, or whatever you think is relevant to develop. Yeah, so all in all, there are multiple ways to improve, and so these are the formal ones. We offer internal courses. We also listen. Sometimes people just approach us and ask for a new course, and we'll develop that. And of course, a lot of learning just happens in the day-to-day. So when we make scripts, we try, or the ambition is that they are actively used by design teams, which already requires, in the case of Grasshopper or something, some literacy, to understand if the inputs are correct, outputs are correct, how to operate sliders, how to read, interpret the results. And we figure out that designers who are really interested in that eventually will go from using a script that we make to modifying it and creating their own.
There's lots of play in them. Yeah.
So the forms of learning and sharing knowledge on tools are quite diverse, and some of them are top-down and initiated, like courses, and others happen more organically. Yeah. I think you need both of those sides.
So I think in your team, clearly, computation plays a big role. That's you got geometry side, the simulation side, but I'm curious to unpack a little bit about how computation plays a role in the office in general. Is there a particular area you see it making the most impacts, maybe like the simulation sustainability side or the geometry side? Unpack a little bit more about how computation plays a role.
I think that's a really interesting side, also, just an interesting question by talking about computation in general and not computational design, because of course everything in the practice has been affected by computation. And if we think about impact as well, I would say loosely you can divide it into two parts. One is, I guess, the things that became default and obvious now because they were so impactful that everyone has implemented them. Right. So I would think, if I would have to look back at 30 years, what have been the most impactful technologies for architects? I would say Google Search, Google Maps, Teams, Miro. So there are a lot of aspects that either foster collaboration, accessing large pools of knowledge, especially for a firm like MVRDV, if you operate globally, and I can travel in Google Street View to another site and get some idea of just how things work, how things look there, probably more impact than a facade optimization generator. Yeah. So I think that the same goes for BIM. It might not be spectacular or catchy to talk about that today, but clearly a massive impact on the industry. So, and then of course there's the other side, which is experimental design, the things that we're like using AI nowadays, doing specific scripts like we did in Valley to optimize or to form find irregular geometries, rationalize them, and so very specific workflows. But I do think that quite often there's a risk that the ambition for computational designers is to, in a way, reduce or simplify, problem solve, and therefore reduce a workflow into something that can be modeled computationally. Right. While these other tools, even like simple things like Miro or Teams, tend to make a process more complex. Like you bring more knowledge from different sources together and somehow find some way to negotiate that or weigh that against each other. So I think both sides are needed, and of course with Next we're much more on the side of modeling geometrical problems. So from facade rationalization to massing studies to material selections and so on. But I'm interested in the relationship between these two elements. So also some of the work we do tangentially approaches the visualization or spatialization of building codes, or looks at the way to represent architectural archives as spatial structures that you can tap into the specific knowledge of a project from 20 years ago. So I think generally my personal ambition with true computation is to extend the possibility space of a project. Yeah. But it does then raise the question of how to find the optimum outputs. So there are these two sides to it, and I think that's in the sense of computation, what it can do is that's really interesting.
Yeah. Do you find what the general level, to go back to kind of like the general level in the office? Do you see designers? Do you find them utilizing computation more and more, or are there other tools that you see kind of the designers gravitating towards?
Yeah, we have. I think when we established Next around 7 years ago, we very quickly anticipated that at the time Grasshopper was somewhat a novelty, or at least with the skill set to operationalize it effectively in a project was somewhat rare. Yeah. And many people of us, including myself, at the time I was recently graduated and also involved in teaching in universities, so it was quite obvious that this will change very soon. And I think nowadays, if I look at TU Delft, they teach Grasshopper in the undergrad, in the bachelor. It is becoming a common skill. And for us, that was a question: if our specialism, our expertise will become common practice, what do we do as a group to, how do we move on? How do we enter new territories of kind of a computational expertise? So yes, I think there's been a drastic increase of skills amongst young architects and students, and it's wonderful to see. And also challenging, honestly, as we're all getting older and you see young kids who have skills and use tools that we've never heard of. So also, which is also a super interesting question in the end in a practice like ours, which is now more than 30 years old, and some of our members of the firm have been working here for more than 30 years. How do you bridge that skill gap now, almost a generational gap in the tools that we use? So again, it's also about making increasingly complex data-driven processes understandable to people who don't engage firsthand with these tools.
We can't come here and not talk about the elephant in the room at the moment, which is AI. Now, I mean, 2024, I think, was a year. There was a lot of high expectations, like this is going to be a crazy year, but it was not maybe as crazy as we thought. I felt there was a little bit of a plateau in AI.
True.
But I'm curious to get your thoughts generally, how you see AI has disrupted the industry or not disrupted it yet, and also kind of how are you experimenting with it? We saw a little bit of stable and that kind of comfy UI stuff, but your thoughts on AI?
Yeah, interesting. It's so new. I haven't, I would say, fully reflected, or we're still experiencing this. I think on the upside, since I've started practicing as an architect, I don't think there has been a moment where so much hope and excitement in architectural discourse was created by a technology. So that's really beautiful. Within MVRDV, it was really from partner to intern, from across culture, everyone would explore that in some form. And so I think there are a few. Yeah, we're not there yet. I think some of that excitement tones down, which is interesting because it will probably reveal the places where this can actually have an impact, rather than trying to squeeze it into any aspect of a design process. I think one big confusion last year or one thing that troubled me, or that made me think last year with regards to AI, is that I was really surprised by that return of the image into the design process. I think if you look at the majority, or don't want to speak for the architectural design process, of course there are different ways to do things, but I do believe that since the 90s, maybe over the last years, we have experienced a shift towards BIM models, towards data tables, towards a kind of rich information, high level of information representation of design, and that also shifting from detailed design more and more into early stages. And so in a way, this move towards, hey, let's prompt images and fine-tune that, I think it came in the moment where it was unexpected. And it was clearly driven by the technology being available through diffusion models and not by the architecture industry saying we need a faster way to produce images. So that, and I think we do miss, or we haven't yet figured out a way to work with images in a concept, or to design through images. Images have been generally moved more and more into a representational field. At the end, you work in BIM, Rhino, whatever scripts. You communicate your project in a render, but you don't design it to renders. I'm not saying it's not possible, but that's something we need to figure out if we want to work with images. So at MVRDV, generally, we've started much earlier with exploring AI. I think the first release of StyleGAN was the first time we scraped our Instagram and trained a generative adversarial network and got some cloudy, beautiful, mysterious images out of that. And in addition to that, I think discriminatory AI, so analytical models, are very interesting to me. So computer vision, we have used that on an urban scale to analyze cities or map cities in, for instance, tracking graffitis in a city and building maps of these kind of informal traces of it. Of course, we've used supervised and unsupervised learning techniques in Grasshopper and Rhino especially for rationalization of complex geometries. What else? Large language models. I think at this point, probably the most interesting AI technology or most promising AI technology for me would be large language models, and increasingly so with some prospect of multimodality, working between data tables, images, potentially 3D models, and text. We've done, of course, built our own ChatGPT models and all that. It's beautiful because in a way those really lead to impact or to application, I think, much faster than images. So for instance, we have uploaded the Dutch building regulations into a ChatGPT, which means you can ask about your project and in a way it's like a chatbot Neufert, but you can build those specifically to different contexts, different legal contexts. So I think still a lot of promise and excitement, but I do also love the images, but I think we need to figure out how to use them or how to give them a place within design processes.
Yeah, I feel like there's this balance between the fun, playful design of image generation and just ideas, endless ideas. But actually, I think the more interesting side is LLMs and the power. You know, you could just put all of your project database and create like a little knowledge of MVRDV projects and things like that. There's balancing like the fun, playful side and the process side, I guess.
Fully agree, and it's also something that we have been thinking about, especially in 2024, how to build custom models, and not just custom LoRa's, but what is the role, especially of an office that has been, I think, what do we have, 750,000 followers on Instagram and pouring a lot out there into the internet. What kind of a representation do we create for MVRDV in artificial intelligences, and what representations would we want to design? So what models do we want to make? So we're collaborating currently also on building a foundational model based on MVRDV's 3D models, so a 3D diffusion model. In a collaboration, we of course built our own LoRa's. We've done a lot of experiments outside of the diffusion space, I think. But application is a difficult thing, no? I think we know increasingly how much effort it takes to build and deploy an AI model, both in expertise but also in raw computational power. And that's something that is harder and harder to access even for large architecture firms. Another element, maybe one that personally I'm really interested in, so I'll just bring that up before we move up on, is we built an application called MVRDV Cloud, so that we used a game engine, Unity, for that, but we also used computer vision models, and we looked at the visual material of early MVRDV, specifically the first 400 projects, and we classified all of that through custom-trained computer vision models, distinguishing like sketches from drawings, from photographs and so on, but also trying to distinguish or build a model that distinguishes between the design language of MVRDV, so much more subjective categories. And it's a very, I think, very beautiful application because it allows you to browse these projects and the archival objects of these projects through time, but also across families or categories, concepts and ideas. And I think my real hope for AI would be to blend the kind of intelligence of algorithmic processes, so Grasshopper scripting, with accessing that large, vast pool of knowledge from the past. Yeah. That would be a dream, I think.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. So we saw a bit over there, we see a bit of Unreal on the screen. You mentioned Unity just now. What's your thoughts on game engines? How, are you experimenting with much in the office and within Next? Yeah, what's your thoughts?
I absolutely love the idea of game engines and or the promise they have towards architecture. I think like the potentials are enormous. I would say generally, taking a step back, MVRDV has really since the 90s built and explored ways to make software or through software design to make architecture processes more accessible. A house maker, a village maker, a region maker, space fighter, a lot of projects, research projects that somehow touch the space between gamification, interaction, multiplayer, architecture creation. Many of these predate game engines, so it's beautiful that now we have these pretty easily accessible environments to really build these things rather than, I don't know, sketch them out in Illustrator or something. We've also done quite a lot of gamification processes just in Rhino and Grasshopper. Of course, a lot less efficient, but has the advantage that you work in your own software. I would have a lot of hope for a stronger use of game engines in the future. Especially, I think, if you looked at the visualization potentials of engines like Unreal Engine, and how fast that progresses, it's really impressive. We have done a few projects. So we're doing an ongoing research now, or a project called Roofscape within MVRDV NEXT, where we built a digital twin in Unity and built essentially a large 3D environment of initially Rotterdam as a city, where you can test different scenarios of the future of rooftops and how they could be activated. And that is now moving from an initiative in Rotterdam to an international collaboration in Northwest Europe. So we got a research grant to continue developing this for the next 4.5 years. And I think the game engines have played a key role in that, just in thinking about interface. It's also a way of storytelling, like what parameters do you expose? How do you list them? How do you annotate? How do you write a manual for that? So I think that's a really interesting thinking for architects. On the critical side, I guess the big issues we face is development times are much longer to build an interactive app than to test an option in Rhino, let's say. So you need to find the right projects that can afford building an app for them. And it's still a relatively rare skill set amongst architects.
It's a steeper learning curve, right?
Yeah, both engines have a pretty steep learning curve, I would say. Yeah.
One question we also like to really ask people is, let's say someone's watching this, they love to come and work in the Next team. What kind of people do you hire, and what do you look for when you hire?
Well, I think we would like to talk and find out together and hear from you. I do think, so there are two sides to that. On the one hand, there are some hard skills that we require. We just practically realize without Rhino and Grasshopper, solid foundational skills in Rhino and Grasshopper, it's hard. That ensures, in a way, a day-to-day. Other than that, I have to say we're a very high, I would say, very diverse team, both in cultural backgrounds, in technical skill sets, also in interests, and I think we benefit from that. So we're very open in interviews, and I think quite often we have hired people who we would not have looked for in the first place. I think a kind of dynamic mindset, ability to also, of course, comprehend complex contexts quickly, and ideally a software that we don't know how to use.
A little superpower.
Indeed, yeah. We have people with fascinations in game engines, visualization, absolute data, nerds who live in Excel, We have people who are more focused on writing or kind of reflection and positioning of technology within design. We have people, of course, who are more design-oriented and know the software less deep. So there's not one recipe. There's some hard skills, as I mentioned. For the rest, it's an enthusiasm and dedication to the tools that you use. Yeah.
My name is Sanne van der Burgh, and I'm the head of MVRDV NEXT.
Thank you so much for having us. We've had a really epic tour with Leo. It's a really incredible space. And I'm really interested about the team, and it seems like you've got a pretty cool crew there doing interesting things. Maybe talk to us about the history of Next and how it got started, how you kind of founded it, and you've been in the office for a while and probably seen how technology is evolving over time. I'm really interested to know how you feel technology has kind of evolved in the office.
I started at MVRDV 15 years ago as an architect, and I've always had a fascination for two things, technology and the planet. Yeah. And when I first came to the office as a junior architect, I was given some tasks where I thought, maybe I can find a way to automate this so I have more time to play. And that's when we brought some Grasshopper into the office, and that took off really well. And there we all discovered the power of automation, not only to facilitate repetition, but also to find new ways of storytelling. And that's, of course, very much a part of MVRDV, is that it's a data-driven office. Yeah. And that's always been a big fascination for me, is how can we utilize data to translate that into informed designs that interact with their environment and their neighborhood. Then when I was in the office for a few years, I've done a lot of projects as an architect. I went through the depot building here in Rotterdam. And I realized that there are more people in the office that are also working on automation and finding, let's say, more ways of doing parametric design. And in the end, we found each other and we said, okay, this is interesting. Should we set up a group? Yeah. And it was thanks to Winnie, Jacob, and Natalie, who asked me in 2017 to actually form this into a department. And we were easy to find each other. And through that, since 2017, we now have MVRDV NEXT. Oh. And NEXT is a combination of computational and environmental architects. We're all architects, but we all have other fascinations as well that we bring into the process and into our daily work.
That's interesting. So you were kind of like a project architect for years, and then was it kind of a hard stop? Did you continue working on projects and then Next came about, or did you make like a hard stop?
No, it's always a gradual transition. Like we were always doing projects and computational things. Yeah. All of us, actually. And at a certain point, we said, okay, we're doing this now in our own projects, but it would make much more sense if we would make ourselves available to the entire office rather than that we are locked up in projects. Yeah. And that's where we, at some point, decided to actually make the jump, first with 2 people, and that gradually grew into the group that we are now. Yeah. So it was a, let's say, gradual transition, but the goal was to free up our capacity to the entire office, because we work all over the world and it only makes sense to work together on an office-wide level.
So I know part of your passion is also the climate side and sustainability side, and the team is kind of very computation and climate analysis driven. Talk to me about that side, like how has that kind of filtered into the design process over years, as well as computation being a part of that?
I'm so happy you asked me this, because this is my big passion. And if you look at the work of MVRDV, actually since the beginning, designing with the environment has been very much the DNA of MVRDV. And since 30 years, we've been designing with sun, with mobility, with social cohesion, with densification. And of course, sustainability, it's a very broad term, means a lot of different things. And as we are always curious to discover what could be the next step, we, a few years ago, were asking ourselves what actually would be our next step into sustainability, because we work all over the world. And that means that in China, the Middle East, your sustainability opportunities or strategies are different from Europe. And we found it important to find a global methodology to steer on impact. And what do I mean by that? If you think of sustainability, most people think of either buildings being very green, like green machines, biodiverse, or energy machines that are covered in solar and heat pumps. And it's usually either one of those two narratives that you still see a lot in the discourse. And we've decided to focus on the climate urgencies of today, the Paris Agreement, and on translating that into actionable strategies for architects. And that's been our work of the past few years, is a deep dive into the world of carbon, and then specifically embodied carbon. And what you see, that's the beauty of NEXT, is that you can bring both environmentalists and computational people together into a group that can actually use each other and empower each other to address global urgencies.
Do you feel like the computation side is a bit like jet fuel to kind of tackle some of those issues? Like now you can deploy, a script and actually get real world data of your building. Did you find like that has really kind of given you fuel over the time?
I think it's a synergy. Like one informs the other. And to be honest, we also went through a whole phase of what you see a lot in on LinkedIn and in the climate sustainability discourse is, these red-blue images, doing a lot of analyses to show that your building is sustainable. And what we realized is that sometimes analysis became the goal itself.
Right.
And that made us admittedly a bit angry at some point, where we thought, no, we're just making red-blue images, and what's the question behind the question? And I think that's a responsibility for us as architects, but also as data-driven designers, is to actually point out that there are responsibilities that come with data-driven design and with designing with analyses. And that's why it's so powerful that we are integrated into the office, where we can actually interweave design and analysis together.
It's not just like post-rationalization.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like part of the design process. As with Leo, we can't come here and not talk about AI, the hot topic at the moment. I'm interested to hear your view on kind of industry-wide. What do you think the impact of AI has been, is going to be, but also in your team, in the office, where do you see it, being used, being experimented with? Do you see it kind of amplifying the sustainability side anywhere? What's your thoughts on AI?
I think AI it's such a broad term, and it's almost like sustainability, which is also a very broad term, and it has many heads and branches. And AI in itself, it can do amazing things. It can be either very inspiring, but also very terrifying. And sometimes what we encounter with AI is that it seems to be a solution looking for a problem, where people say, okay, we're going to do something with carbon, but now use AI. And
it's like this new sprinkle. You just sprinkle a bit of AI on it.
Sprinkle a bit of AI. We have had everything. We have AI carpet tiles, AI columns, AI analysis to prove that you cannot look through a wall. So for me, the question is not so much what do we think of AI, but what are meaningful ways to deploy it. And if you look at the hype curve, which is a curve that kind of goes like this, I think we're kind of now somewhere at the peak of the hype curve, where we sometimes tend to think, oh my God, we're all out of a job. And at some point we will realize that we reach the valley of deflated expectations, where we realize that it can take over parts of our process, and it can enhance our work, it can give us new things, but it also has its limitations within let's say, the ethics of architecture. I'm framing it now here. But it's a process, and I think the same peak we've gone through with AutoCAD and with Rhino and with Enscape and with Revit. So it's another wave, and I think it's architects should just stay ahead of the curve rather than be surprised with it.
So yeah, since you've literally probably built the team from the beginning, you've hired most of the people in the team, what do you look for when you bring people into the team, and like a young architect sitting here that's really inspired by the work you guys are doing, maybe one day will come and join your team? What do you look for?
Within our group, as you say, we started with nothing, with ourselves. And what we look for in people is, first of all, an understanding of what MVRDV stands for and what our mission is, what we're trying to achieve. And apart from that, we are working in an extremely dynamic environment. And for that, we don't even look at software skills, but for us, the most important thing is that people know how to learn. And if you have that skill of having curiosity and a willingness to learn new things, that's an incredibly important skill set. More, I would say so, than actually having skills.
Those skills, yeah. So just that curiosity, it's a bit like Leo also said, was hacking, finding, trying new things, curiosity.
Yes, curiosity and this mindset of, if you think that something might be interesting, then by all means do explore it, but with a healthy critical attitude.
Yeah. One question we always like to ask guests is 2025, a lot going on, AI, game engines, 3D printing, whatever it may be. Is there any kind of particular technology or thing that you're really excited about on the horizon?
Yes. What we look forward to, or what I look forward to, is that we've been working for the past few years on a methodology to have informed discussions with each other about carbon emissions. We just opened an exhibition about our research, but we will also launch our software, which is called Carbonscape, and that focuses on comparing internationally and actually opening up the climate discourse on a global level. And through that, what we hope to achieve is to invite others to join us in zooming out from project level or even national level into a global carbon discourse debate, and actually opening almost a carbon Facebook where we can all see how we are doing, and to hopefully lead by example in how can we become better at sharing things as an industry.
I like that. Maybe unpack that a little bit. What is this tool? Is it like a platform or something that, a plugin that people can use? Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
It started off as a Grasshopper plugin, and then we realized that we would be better off making something that's globally accessible, so an online tool. And what we also realized is that all architecture firms are building carbon tools.
Yeah.
And then we thought, okay, everybody is building carbon tools. And due to the nature of the industry, we tend to sit on top of our things and not share them. And that's where we thought, okay, why don't we just openly share what we did, so others can just give it a try and react on it. And then we can focus from the tool being the goal to the tool just being a means.
Right.
To have better discussions, because in the end, tools are not the goal. It's what you do with the tools and how you use them. And hopefully that can give us, as a community, better insights and better discussions and steer on impact.
I love that, because we've seen a lot of carbon tools on our on our tours, and it's no secret, everyone's building a carbon tool. And I feel like, as architects, we can build a good in-house tool, but it may not be able to scale, and that's when you get into like that development side. So I think this idea of just sharing what you have, that's actually could be more powerful than a tool.
I agree, and in the end, it's not about having a tool and having a number that comes out of the tool, but it's about the methodology you use and the data you use, and to be able to bring that transparency and an openness, I think can really help the global discourse.
That's really cool. I'm definitely excited to see more from it. Thank you guys once again for joining us on a tour. Another incredible tour here in the Netherlands, and a great way to finish our trip. We have got one more special. In the next episode, we'll actually give you guys a tour around Amsterdam, and we'll be visiting some of the buildings that you've seen in these tours, so check that out. As always though, if you like this episode, give us a like and a subscribe. The more people we get onto the channel, the more firms we can get into. So thank you guys once again for the support, and we'll see you on our next trip and our next tour on the channel.